Hello, my name is Amber Satchwell and I have borderline personality disorder.
Can you explain what borderline personality disorder actually is?
Well, I think it's like with any condition, it is quite personal in terms of everyone shows it in different ways. But for me personally, it's the kind of attachment. You quite often have like a favourite person and be really invested in one thing for a significant amount of time, kind of fear of abandonment, that sort of stuff. And generally with most personality disorders, it's that emotional irregularity. It's the extreme highs, the extreme lows, and very quick changing mood swings, that sort of thing. You're often very open and very like, this is who I am, this is how I'm feeling, when actually the wider world isn't as accepting of that as it perhaps could be. So yeah, I think it's impossible to have BPD and not have levels of depression and anxiety amongst that. I think it is a very tricky condition because it consumes a lot of different parts of your mental health.
So whenabouts were you diagnosed with BPD?
So just before I went to university, I actually got a diagnosis of EUPD. So I was 18 at the time and I had a really awful appointment with a psychiatrist who told me that I was just a teenager, I was making it all up, I was attention seeking, all of this stuff. And I remember leaving that appointment and feeling really rubbish about myself, being like, oh God, like everything I've been doing and feeling, I'm just doing it for attention, because, you know, these are the sort of people that, you know, kind of tell you what's going on. And then I received a letter saying that I've got a diagnosis of EUPD. So I called the hospital and ended up having a meeting with the kind of practice manager and a clinical nurse practitioner. And she said, well, it's actually what we quite often call borderline personality disorder. And I said, well, that wasn't explained to me at all, actually. And she read off the things I'd mentioned, like the attachment stuff, the kind of fixations on certain people or things, mood changes, all of that sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. So I think it's hard to get diagnosed with anything and labels get thrown around a lot. But actually, for me, having that label was really valuable. And so I wish that it was done in a way where it's, oh, actually, you've got this diagnosis, this is what it means, rather than me having to seek that information almost.
You said it was EUPD initially, so what's the difference between that and BPD?
Yeah, so I think it's worth saying that it's individual for every person. Like with any condition, everyone will have different things that they particularly go, yes, that makes so much sense, that's how I've been feeling, what they relate to more. For me, it was the emotional irregularity, so the extreme highs and the extreme lows. I think it's impossible to have BPD and not have a level of depression and anxiety there. But also things like the attachment issues, so being very scared of people leaving, a lot of worries about having people in my life one minute and not the next, investing a lot into those relationships and friendships and having a fixation on something for a really long period of time, or like a favourite person. And actually, you know, sometimes that's a really lovely thing, as it means for me, I really do commit wholeheartedly into everything and do anything for my friends and things like that, which is lovely. But also it then becomes difficult because not everybody's like that. And that's not a bad thing, it just means we're a bit different.
So how was education?
So I will say I was bullied from a very young age for one thing or another. Whether it was, oh, you're too clever, or you're too fat, or you're too this. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people go through anyway, but especially if you've got a mental health condition or a disability and people straight away identify you as different, you do tend to, unfortunately, face some negativity. Even when I was very little, I had like a play therapist because I was very overactive, very hyperactive, constantly need to be on the go doing things. I slept very little. I didn't have a full night's sleep until I was about 6 years old, my mum said. I actually knocked myself out on a baby gate because I got so frustrated about sleeping when I was little. I've always been very bubbly, very loud, quite emotional and sensitive, struggled to keep long-term friendships and took things very much to heart. So things that other children wouldn't be so upset about was the end of the world for me. And I mean, something as simple as when Pokemon cards were a huge thing, I remember that I actually took some of my friends' Pokemon cards really impulsively, and then I got home and I felt so guilty about it. Must have only been about 8 years old, and I remember saying to my mum, I feel so guilty, I want to die. And that was such an extreme reaction, but for me, that was how extreme that feeling was. And I think that's the thing, we all feel emotions, but how extreme that is and how much it affects us is where you do actually realise, okay, this isn't quite right. Like I shouldn't feel as bad as I do, or I would like to not feel as bad as I do. So yeah, it was a struggle going through school, and I think it's fair to say that it definitely affected me. I was very much a perfectionist. I wanted everything to be amazing. I didn't want to upset anybody, do anything wrong. Massive fear of rejection. And looking back now, I can understand why now I've got the diagnosis.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to hear that, you've seen the changes in yourself as well. So did you have a lot of help from services in child and adulthood?
Yeah, so I had a play therapist when I was about 3 years old. When I was about 8, I had my first sessions of counselling, and that's because actually my mum had cancer at the time and I was a young carer, which was hard as it was, but even then I was still struggling, and not about that really. We barely spoke about that. It was more other kids at playtime wanted to go and play outside, but I didn't want to. I wanted to sit in the classroom and just chill, or just sit on the bench and do nothing. And they were kind of like, oh, that's very odd. And actually, now I'm like, no, that was me recharging my batteries. It's tiring being so emotional all the time and having those extreme highs and lows. And so, yeah, I had a lot of that. I had counselling through school from the age of about 12. There's cognitive behavioural therapy, so that's CBT, and that's a lot about understanding your emotions, not judging them so much, so being a bit kinder to yourself about them, and recognising the types of thoughts you're having. So we all have unhelpful thoughts that are actually not serving any purpose. Kind of fortune telling, we go, well, in the future this will happen, when we don't know that. We're telling ourselves that because we're worried about it. And that was useful because identifying those thoughts meant that I was able to choose which ones to put too much energy into, perhaps. And there's DBT, so that's Dialectal Behavioural Therapy, which is kind of the most recognised therapy for borderline personality disorder. And I mean, I'm not trained in this, but to my understanding, that's also a lot about understanding your emotions and how to regulate. And I think that's really useful because you can be put on medications and mood stabilisers, but the reality is it's distressing when you can't control your emotions and perhaps aren't feeling the emotion you feel you should in that moment. You could be having a really amazing thing happen and still feel desperately sad, or something exciting happen and you're way too overexcited about it that actually it's then so draining afterwards. So yeah, it's the extremes, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. So have the services been easy access for you, or have they been things in the way?
I would say I've been fortunate in the sense that I have had access to services. However, that does still mean very long waiting lists, very unfortunate situations where I've been told by crisis teams, oh, well, we can't actually help you until you actually try and kill yourself. And, when you're in that bad frame of mind, the last thing you need is someone to say, well, if you go and do that thing you are trying to stop yourself from doing, we will help you. And I think that's my biggest thing that has really frustrated me, that actually if there were more services and support put in place early on that actually dealt with the root of these problems sooner rather than letting it get to the point of wanting to take your own life, I think that would actually be more beneficial, because the last thing you need when you're already in that vulnerable place is to feel like nobody can help you until you get even worse. Even the other day I had a phone call from the GP surgery, and they've got a nurse that's in the surgery, and they said there's not really much we can do for you. You're on a waiting list for a medication review and you're on a waiting list for psychotherapy, but currently my counselling's finished because you're only entitled to a certain amount of sessions through the NHS. I definitely don't have the funds to be paying for it privately. But yeah, there are services out there, and I'd always say speak to your GP, go to Citizens Advice, go to anywhere you can. Google is fantastic. You will find services, you can self-refer, you don't need your GP to do it all the time. Definitely go for that help, but also have that understanding of there will be a level of, you will be on waiting lists, and there are a lot of resources you can do for yourself. And I think as hard as that is to motivate yourself when you're feeling low, I think it's really valuable if you can find something that helps you, whatever that might be.
So with, you're talking about those different phases, do you think medication's helped you at all?
I've experienced a lot of different medications for various conditions I have, but in terms of mental health medications, I've certainly experienced it that a lot of things interact badly with one another or with other medications you're taking. So for example, contraceptive pills are a really classic case of they can make people suicidal, they can really affect your moods, and I was definitely a case of this. I went on the contraceptive pill at one point, which was actually meant to help regulate my emotions and kind of generally make the situation better. And that absolutely did not happen for me. If anything, my mood was so much lower. Then I've been on everything from like fluoxetine, citalopram, amitriptyline, quetiapine, somatropam, which is like more epilepsy and migraine medication, all sorts. But I've also had a situation where actually recently I did go into hospital feeling very suicidal, and I was open about it, but I was not myself. That's all I can describe it as. It was a very out-of-body experience. I couldn't stop rocking, I was shaking, I was humming because everything felt loud, had my eyes shut because everything was... It was just, the only way I can describe it is my brain felt too loud that any other stimulus was too much. And I knew that what I needed was to go somewhere and be safe. But all they could do, really, I went in there, the triage nurse went, until you tell me what's going on, you're wasting my time, which saying it to someone who is rocking and crying and can't think is not helpful. And then saying you're wasting my time, I then tried to leave, and luckily the amazing people, the nurses that were actually in the A&E, they kept me there. I then was put on a medication that I then found out 2 days later when I called my GP, because I looked in, you know, they give you the booklet that tells you what you can and can't do. My other medication that I've been on long term was in that, saying do not mix them. And yeah, I called my GP and he said, come off it straight away. I've already got a heart condition. I was then taking medication, I shouldn't have been with it. And this is the thing, there is a value to medication, and I think that medication alongside support and therapy and actual things you can do to feel better can be good. It's almost like the medication is a good way to kind of take the pedal off the gas a little bit so you're stable enough to deal with the support, but I don't think it can be used alone. And it's very rare to get doctors that look at you as a whole person if you've got other conditions and mental health problems. So for me with work, it's hard because people see you working as functioning, when actually for me having that sense of purpose and doing something I love and that motivation to get out of bed is really important. But then when the support isn't there, and most support you get from the NHS is 9 till 5, and you're working 9 till 5, it's really hard to get the support you need. And it has meant that I have lost job opportunities and I've lost support opportunities because it feels like I have to choose between what's right for my mental health and having a job. And that's a really hard concept, because it would be a lot easier for me to say, right, I'm not going to work because that's what's best for me, when actually that isn't what's best for me. And I would love it to be that I could have support alongside that rather than compromise constantly, which I do think with mental health and any disability, you find yourself compromising because the world isn't built for you.
No, for sure, I agree with that completely. It is a hard compromise, but you've got to do it sometimes. I mean, would you say, so thinking about that, over the years, have things got progressively better for you, or have it sort of taken steps back now?
I think it's fair to say it goes in phases, just like my moods are very up and down. And I'll have weeks where it's not like I'm doing amazing and I'm happy and everything's okay, but I'm like on a relatively okay baseline. And then I'll have days where I know I'm visibly overstimulated, very hyperactive, really productive, trying to do everything, very intense with my emotions, and that's exhausting too. And on those days, it's really easy to give in to that and say to my body, yeah, let's do everything because we've got the energy to do it and we're buzzing. But actually that's really dangerous, because then you crash twice as hard. And then there'll be other times where I'm so low that I genuinely think, well, I don't want to be here the next day. And that's the hard thing of it. I think people assume that, oh, you've got this thing, so, you know, well, you were all right to do that the other day, so you must be fine now. And with every disability or mental health condition, that's just not the case. It comes in phases, it ebbs and flows. You wouldn't say to someone with a broken leg, oh, well, you know, you didn't have a broken leg the other day, so you could do that. So now you've got a broken leg, you can do it still, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. But I would say it's not like it's progressively getting worse. I think it does sometimes become progressively more upsetting that you come to the realisation of how many years you've been going through this, how many years it's not been getting better, how many years you've been on waiting lists, waiting for services. And as you get older, there is also the pressure of, when you're a child with these issues, you haven't got bills to pay. You haven't got, you know, a life to try and sustain, because there are people doing that for you. It's hard to maintain a life and work and shopping and eating and those basic things when you're struggling. And actually, yeah, that's really tough, and you don't have someone to do it for you.
No, for sure. That's really interesting to hear, as you know, I myself have got mental health issues, and hearing, you know, the fact that these services aren't just, it's not just, oh, you've got minor problems here, it's hard across the whole line, which is, you know, quite amazing to hear, especially not just across, you know, for ages I thought it was just London problematic. To hear it's problems even down here in Southend on Sea, it just shows there's a bigger problem, and it's amazing to hear. So no, thank you for bringing that out, and thank you for talking about, you know, a problem which I don't think many people realise is out there.
Yeah, I think there's a thing of, don't use that to discourage you from getting help. Help should always be something you seek and you go for, and you be open with and honest about how you're feeling, and you will be okay. There will be someone that will help you and support you, but there's still a lot more we can do, and there's amazing people in the mental health services who are really passionate, but I think we've still got a long way to go.
No, and thank you for talking to us with the channel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for helping out.